Happy Sunday, Real Writers. Chris here. Welcome to your weekly Journal with Me session. And I know we've just passed Halloween. I hope you had a super spooky time. But I wanted to break out my literary witches oracle cards because this is a deck I got a while back that I mentioned in another video that I was so excited to find. This is exactly the kind of deck I've been looking for. There's another deck I backed that is a tarot deck that I need to check on and see where that is, but it also has literary figures, writers, etc. And so this is a 70 card oracle deck, and it's based on Literary Witches, a celebration of magical women writers, which is a book by Taisia, Kitaiskaia, and Katy Horan, or Horan. And the book reimagines visionary women writers as witches, which I love. They call them formidable figures of creativity and empowerment. And the book honors their conjuring powers. And this deck has 30 author portraits from the book, which are the witches, as well as 40 paintings inspired by the book's imagery, and these are the witches' materials. And these cards offer the presence of magical literary artists and their witchy familiars as portals to guidance and meditation. The artwork is pretty dark. It's quite dark, very symbolic and metaphorical and surreal. So you might find some of the images disturbing. I certainly did, but I still love the deck and I still want to work with it. So I just wanted you to see the deck itself. That's Emily Dickinson on the cover, appropriate. And let me move this over so we can focus on the cards. And if you're new to my videos, to this Sunday Journal with Me session, welcome. Thank you for joining me. I pull some cards from my many, many decks, anywhere from 1 to 6 cards. It just depends on my mood and how much time I have. And we journal on these cards after looking at their meanings for 10 minutes. I try to keep the videos to 30 minutes or less. I have gone over occasionally. If there's a lot to say and share, then I do. And if you've been joining me for a while, thank you. We crossed the 6-month mark a while back, and I really hope this practice is giving you a good break or rest or pause in your week to reflect and to spend time with yourself and have some time for self-care. You don't have to be a writer to do these videos. I have a website, therealwriter.com, and that's also my email address, therealwriter@gmail.com. I run a small press. I am a book editor, or an editor in general. I work with poetry, prose, whether novels or short stories, essays, nonfiction. I've taught all of those things, as well as 10-minute playwriting, which is super fun. And I'm going to get back into teaching, which I've been away from for a while, pretty soon. And I have a novel coming out in 2020 called The Heresy of Silence from Serving House Books. So I've been in the world of writing a very, very long time. So let's get started. Last time I went from the far right, and I'm going to do that again. I have some sodalite here with us, which is a great stone for writers and a wonderful blue for the throat chakra and communication. So our first card is, I have to use my glasses, Sandra Cisneros. And her card represents the body. The artwork is super cool in these cards. The body. So, let's look at Sandra's card. Sandra's card. I know too many people who are both Sandra. I know too many Sandras and Sandras, so I end up doing that interchangeably. Okay. The meaning of this card is joys of the body, sorrows of the body, and the senses. So let me read you the bio that's here. That's the description. That's it. But there's a wonderful bio for each writer in case you don't know them. Born in a working-class Chicago neighborhood to a Mexican father and Mexican-American mother, Sandra Cisneros navigates the richness and misogyny of both Mexican and American cultures. She vowed to never marry and to always have a house of her own. Her most famous book, The House on Mango Street, a coming-of-age novel of saturated sensory vignettes, is taught in elementary schools and colleges alike. Make sure to check out her poetry, which asserts a healthy sexuality, and her masterful short stories too. So again, the joys of the body, sorrows of the body, and the senses. So I think it's pretty clear. I don't know why, sorry, this is blurry. But I think this is really clear. I mean, the first thing you notice is what? There's this sort of birth, both womb and vaginal canal imagery here. There's this, where the placement of this portal opening like image is in the abdomen, where normally, where the womb is. But then it has its what does that look like to you? It definitely looks like the vagina and the vaginal canal and all that. So there we have it. We finally said the word vagina in these videos. A milestone. And so, that's a place of power and creativity and also vulnerability. It's a portal, literally. And as the deck mentioned, there's consider your sexuality, sensuality, things you might be birthing, things you would like to birth, whether as a writer or a creative person or with no label at all. If you're not comfortable with that yet, you might be buying a house. You might be trying to get a new job. You might be cleaning out a garage to create an office for yourself. Who knows? You might literally be trying to have a child or do a creative project or travel, or what is this thing you're trying to birth, this new creation in your life? What portal are you trying to pass through? But also, how grounded are you in your body? That's a tough question for a lot of people. How grounded are you in the joys of having a body, whether that be through exercise or, as the write-up said, through your sexuality or whatever, taking a bath, lying in the sun, the senses. How often do you tune into your senses? That might be something to consider. There's a wonderful exercise that I give people in my writing classes that I ask them to do through sometimes through the entire class, and that is, and I'll look it up because there's an article about it on like poets.org or something, because I did not invent this, and I forget who did. It's called, I call it 6 Things, and I'll link to the article in the description box, and it's about every day writing down 6 sensory details that you notice. It doesn't have to make any sense. It can be in fragments. It could be the shadows the sun makes in a curtain with the trees or on the floor, or the distant sound of a church bell, or a bird on the windowsill, or I don't know, the sound the air conditioning makes, or in my case the heat, which is on right now because it's cold, yay. And whatever it is, but to try to focus on all of the senses and write something for each one to get in the habit of noticing. And so for this card, you might do that, but you might also write down sensory things in terms of the body. Do a body scan. consider temperature, consider how your body feels, whether soft, heavy, do you feel sleepy? I don't know when you're doing this. You could be doing this very late. Are you sleepy? Are you dreamy? That's more of a mental state. But how do your clothes feel on your skin? Are your feet flat on the ground, and how does that feel? Your hair on your cheek. Is there anything bothering you? Anything itching? Or, focus on the body and just take some stock there. So you might just make a list of all of that for today's journaling session. That would be an interesting exercise. That was a lot to take in, but see what resonated with you. So the next card is our U.S. Poet Laureate, Joy Harjo. Wonderful poet. And, well, that's appropriate, is bravery. Joy is bravery. I had the great pleasure of meeting Joy Harjo and taking a class with her and hearing a reading when I was at A Room of Her Own Foundation's writing conference in New Mexico, A Room of Her Own Foundation, which takes its name after Virginia Woolf's essay. A good read if you haven't read that essay. And it took place at Ghost Ranch in New Mexico, which is where Georgia O'Keeffe lived. And I worked with the wonderful poet Kim Adonisio. Hope I've said Kim's name right. She is kick-ass. So if you don't know Kim's work, look her up. Adonisio. I will post a link in the description box because I think it's 2 D's and 2 Z's in her name, but I need to check. So I will look it up. But she has this awesome poem about a red dress. I'm going to write that down so I make sure to do that for you guys. She has an amazing poem about a red dress and about how she wants to be buried in a red dress, if I'm remembering the poem correctly. And she also has branched into fiction. So she has a bunch of novels out as well that are a good read. Anyway, Joy was there. She was a special guest because she was teaching at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, so I don't know if she's still doing that. But here's my sort of Halloween-y kind of story. It was not Halloween. I think it was July. But she was doing this reading, and it was at night in this gorgeous space with these wonderful giant floor-to-ceiling windows. And she plays the saxophone while at some point during her readings, and at some point she broke out the saxophone, and I don't know, it was like 9 o'clock or something by then. It was very dark outside. I mean, we're out in the desert in New Mexico, so it was very dark, and there weren't very many lights, so you were told, almost none actually, so you were told to bring flashlights so you could find your way back to your cabin. So very, very dark, and the doors were open. And as Joy was playing, a bat flew into this huge space, which was very cathedral-like, very church-like in its ceiling. It rose up quite high. And the bat just started zooming around the room and over her head. And we're mostly women in this group, and I'm sorry, my sisters, I'm calling us out. Everyone was screaming. Not too loud, because they were trying not to be rude, but ducking and screaming and covering their heads. It was ridiculous. Yeah, I was a little worried. I put the book I had in my hand over my head because who knows? Do bats really get in your hair? I don't know, but I wasn't going to find out. But I was just still sitting there watching her, and she just didn't do anything. She glanced up. She kept playing. It felt like a visitation. It felt like a partnership between the two of them, her and the bat. And it was really cool. And she was so calm and so, this is the natural world. Why are you all freaking out? I'm sure she was thinking that. And then the bat flew out, and that was the end of that. But it was really cool. It was a great moment. So that's my Joy Harjo story. Let me find her card. So as we mentioned, the card is bravery, and it means plunging in, making decisions, and fear. Harjo, a common Creek Nation name, means so brave she's crazy. Oh my gosh, I love that. That's awesome. That might be your new mantra, right? I'm so brave, I'm crazy. Let's all do that. That's fantastic. Joy Harjo courageously survived an oppressive childhood, teenage pregnancy, and domestic abuse before becoming a spiritually charged poet of wild natural imagery and urgent social activism, as well as an award-winning saxophone player and singer. I can attest to that. So, again, plunging in, making decisions, and fear. So let me just pull this card a bit in for a second. So in case that's not clear in this image, she's in a pond. This is water she's emerged, she has plunged into or immersed in. And then above her, is this falling doll-like figure. And then horses. She has a wonderful, wonderful poem about horses. So I'll link to Joy. I'll link to all of these writers, but she's our U.S. Poet Laureate right now. So someone you should get to know, whose work you should get to know. So notice how the water is very dark, but look how fertile it is, full of vines and flowers, and it hardly looks... It does have that wild sort of look to it, and these are wild horses. So, what are you afraid of? And how can you plunge into that fear and own it? If you can own it and name it, it gives you power over it. How can you fall back and trust that you can work with that fear and that you can own it and not be ruled by it? And look at her face in this image. It's so serene, and there's a smile, and she's looking forward. I mean, that to me is really empowering. And there are these lines underneath the falling figure to indicate the falling and the movement there. And what came to mind for me is that creativity of any kind, and really life, which is a creative act. You're creating your life every day. That is a creative act. So if you don't think you're a creative person, you're wrong. You are creating your life day by day. That makes you creative. So living life is it's falling every day, isn't it? It's an act of trust. You're falling every day. And some days it's easier to deal with that than others. I don't know about you, but sometimes I've gone through periods of just letting go and surrendering to whatever happens because I feel capable, or I just feel too tired to fight it anymore. And then other times it's really too uncertain and pretty scary, and it's like you've been pushed off a cliff whether you liked it or not. But what I'm getting from this card is at the bottom of the fall, if one ever stops falling, is, yeah, there can be a deep darkness, but it can also be a place of beauty and wildness. And I'm trying to think of this word that I have that I want to say, but I can't think of it. Belonging or acceptance, that's not it, but that's as close as I can come right now. To not be afraid of those dark places where you can't see what's below the surface, because look what's below the surface. Beauty and growth and the wildness is not terrifying. It's easy to say be brave, but it's something you have to do every day. I think it's a habit you can get used to over time of just you know, developing that and sort of sitting in that space every day of looking through this filter of just being brave and just not just looking forward and taking the plunge and trusting that you will be held and you will float. And actually, I mean, she's not floating. She is being held by the water, but it feels like she's got her 2 feet on the ground in there. So she's safe. She's confronting that dark place and she's safe. And the darkness, if you think of it as a beautiful, creative, fertile wildness, that's a lot less scary. At least to me. I hope it is to you too. Bit of a ramble there, but that's what came up. So let's go on to card number 3. And I'm probably going to have to do 2 videos out of this because we're going to be way over 30 minutes. And here we have Anne Carson. Truly terrifying. Anne Carson always scares me. She just does. And this image doesn't help. Let me look at it because I have bifocals, you guys. So, okay, so in her hand is a volcano. In her hand is a volcano. And she's holding an eye. It's not hers. She still has her eyes. But she's holding an eye. And Anne is the intellect, which if you know her work is very appropriate. Such a stern, spare, stark figure. But she's got this, it's like she has the third eye in her hand, doesn't she? And that she pulled it out herself so as to see better, which I would fully believe Anne Carson capable of, pulling out her own eye to see better. So let's read a little bit about Anne Carson. Poet, essayist. I struggle with her work. I love reading it, but a lot of times I'm just thinking she must be on some really good drugs. And I don't mean it, I'm not calling her a drug addict. That's not what I mean, but it has a sort of hallucinatory quality, her work. So, or at least to me it does. Her card means intellectual growth, delights of the mind, and plagues of the mind. Anne Carson, a prolific writer of poems, essays, and various literary hybrids, works with themes of lost family members, love and lust, religion, and the intellectual traditions. The combination of this MacArthur Fellowship recipient's austerity, startling insights, and relentless questioning is as awe-inspiring and explosive as the volcanoes she has been known to paint. Carson is also a scholar of ancient Greek and Latin texts and a champion of fellow witches, having translated Sappho and written about Emily Bronte and Virginia Woolf. So I highly recommend, I will again link to these writers, I challenge you all in the next year as we go through these cards to read one of their books. Or at least read something online. If there's an essay or a short story, because a book feels like too much, then read that. But I challenge you, oh, I'm sorry, this is so blurry, to read Anne Carson. She really, that was a really good description of her work. And I think my best advice about Anne Carson is to just let go and let Anne do her thing. Try not to make sense of it. Try not to organize it. Try not to translate what she's saying through your own filter and experience and into your own symbols so that you can understand it. Let her take you where she's trying to take you. That is my best advice. Just surrender to Anne Carson. That's basically what I'm saying. It will be a very interesting, disturbing, exciting experience. So that's my advice for Anne. And let's get started. that's our 10 minutes. Feel free to keep journaling. Pause the video and keep journaling. I went with joy, personally. The term bravery really appealed to me. It's not something I have a handle on for sure. I think it's always going to be an ongoing thing, not just for me, for everyone. I'm sure joy has her moments as well. But what came up and what I forgot to say as I was writing, what I forgot to say to all of you is that water is about emotions. It's a symbol of the emotions and the subconscious. And the idea of plunging into that is very appealing to me. I feel personally that I've been trapped in a lot of the BS of the material world for the last 2 years with selling a house, changing jobs, just trying to survive, working with crazy people, and now not doing that anymore, which is great. And or in a very man-made, crazy political environment, which I'm very happy to be out of, and at a place that's actually doing good in the world, and people who really care and are the embodiment of, I'm going to use the dreaded T word, being a team. I have to think of a better word. I know there are better words out there to describe that. But because of that, and if you're stuck in a situation where you feel like you're just trying to survive, you don't have time for floating around in your subconscious and your emotions. And you don't want to float around in your emotions. Your emotions are probably, you're probably drowning in them. So, this is to me a card saying that it's a friendly place to visit again, once again. And it's going to be a wild place. And it's going to take you places you didn't expect, but you can trust that. And as a creative person, if that's how you identify yourself, or a writer, whatever kind of writing you do, and if you're a playwright or a songwriter, for example, you write, you're a writer. So for me, this was sort of a way to look at getting back into that world, that wild place that I would like my writing to be. That's what came up for me. Kind of long today, sorry about that, but there'll be timestamps if you want to look at other things, other cards. If you just picked one and you want to look at other cards, check the timestamps. And I'd love to know what you think of these writers, if you've read them, what your favorite books are, or their or poems, or their works, essays, whatever. Anything that comes up for you, I'd love to know in the comments. And I think I'll leave it there. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Sunday and a great week next week. And happy writing, witches.